Hey everybody, this is chapter 3 of John E. Kelly's The Twilight of World Trotskyism. This chapter is called The Current State of World Trotskyism. I'm releasing all these different chapters just as like standalone pieces because I don't want to feel pressure upon myself to finish reading the book. So, how should we gauge the strength of the Trotskyist movement? As with any social or political movement, there are two indicators that should stand out as being especially relevant: membership and political influence. Membership figures provide a basic indicator of a party's level of support and estimate of the numbers of people prepared not only to endorse its message, but to work for it and to make a financial contribution to the organization. It is, however, an imperfect measure for a variety of reasons. Membership may be deemed unaffordable for low-income citizens. Small organizations may have limited geographical reach, so that many smaller towns may lack a party branch, and in many countries there may be significant risks attached to joining a revolutionary party. Nonetheless, the membership levels are important because they all measure the volume of personnel and financial resources available to small political parties. Members not only join a national group, but often an international group too, because the overwhelming majority of Trotskyist organizations are affiliated to a, quote, Fourth International, end quote, a reflection of Trotskyist antagonism to the idea of socialism, quote, in one country, end quote. The chapter therefore reports on the state of international organization amongst Trotskyist groups. Another measure of support for Trotskyism comes from elections, where organizations openly campaign amongst the general public and seek to exploit discontent with mainstream parties. Trotskyist groups, as we shall see below, often disparage elections and by implication election results as inadequate measures of party support, noting that popular attitudes can change rapidly in a, quote, explosion of consciousness, end quote. See Blackburn, 1967. Even if that point is conceded, free and fair elections provide a good, if imperfect, measure of the degree of popular support for Trotskyist parties. It is imperfect because voting is influenced by other considerations, such as tactical decisions about which party is best placed to win or to damage an opponent. Consequently, we also consider other evidence of Trotskyist political influence from national case studies. New section: Membership and Organization. Membership figures are exceptionally difficult to locate since most Trotskyist groups refuse to publish them. Even the few available members mainly emanate from the Trotskyist groups themselves and are therefore almost certainly inflated. Before looking at these figures, it is worth establishing some benchmarks against which to make comparisons and enable meaningful evaluation of Trotskyist problems and achievements. One obvious starting point is the achievement of their deadly rivals, the communist parties, once loyal to Moscow. At the height of their influence between the 1940s and the 1970s, mass communist parties existed throughout the world, most notably France, where Communist Party membership peaked just after World War II at around 800,000, and in Italy, where the party achieved a membership approximately 2,500,000 in 1950. Even if these figures are inflated, they remain exceptionally large. Communists also built mass parties in smaller European countries such as Finland, where the party membership reportedly exceeded 52,000 in 1963 in a population of just 4.5 million. Beyond Europe, mass communist parties based on mid-1960s figures were also found in Asia and Latin America: India 150,000, Japan 300,000, Argentina 100,000, Brazil 20,000, Chile 30,000, and Venezuela 20,000. See Svarovsky, 1973. It is true that national communist parties derived substantial funding from Moscow and undoubtedly benefited from the wartime popularity of the Red Army and the Soviet Union, particularly in the wake of its victory over the Nazis at Stalingrad. It is equally true that Trotskyist organizations enjoyed no such benefits and moreover suffered unrelenting hostility from communist and social democratic parties alike. Nonetheless, after two bleak decades of the post-World War II era, Trotskyist groups did begin to grow in many countries in the 1960s, entering what would prove to be a, quote, golden age, end quote, of membership and influence. However, a comparison between the peak membership figures for Trotskyist groups and those of their communist rivals is clearly problematic. The peak period of communist membership and political influence in many countries was the few years after the Second World War, when Trotskyist organizations were relatively new and almost completely unknown to most people. Moreover, levels of party membership were generally higher at the time than in the latter part of the century, at least in Western Europe. A better comparison focuses on peak Communist and Trotskyist party membership after 1970, by which time many Trotskyist parties had entered the, quote, golden age, end quote, of their growth. The countries where we have the most reliable and extensive data are the 4 countries which house the majority of the world's 4th internationals and which contain the largest national Trotskyist organizations: Argentina, Britain, France, and the USA. Membership figures for the Communist parties and for the largest Trotskyist parties in these 4 world centers of Trotskyism are shown in Table 3.1. It is clear from this evidence that even the largest Trotskyist groups have come nowhere near the membership figures of their communist rivals, either before or after 1970. Okay, so peak membership. I'm just going to read peak membership. Okay, so Argentina, peak Communist Party membership was 100,000 in 1963, and its post-1970 peak was 70,000 in 1984. In Argentina, the largest Trotskyist party, Movimiento al Socialismo, reached a peak of 14,000 in 1982. So the Communist Party peaked at 10,000. The Communist Party peaked at 100,000 in Argentina, and the Trotskyist Party peaked at 14,000. In Britain, the Communist Party's all-time peak was at 56,000 in 1942, and its post-1970 peak was 79,000 in 1973. And the Trotskyist Party, and there was 3 Trotskyist parties. Socialist Workers' Party had a peak membership of 10,000 in 1994. The Workers' Revolutionary Party had a membership of 8,913 at its peak in 1985. The Militant Tendency / Revolutionary Socialist League had 8,100 in 1986. It would be actually interesting here. They have the Communist Party. So the Communist Party peak was 56,000, and its post-1970 peak was 29,000, and none of these, the Trotskyist Party's peak membership ever reached above 10,000. I think it would be interesting, however, to see if there was some way of gauging what was the peak involvement in the Trotskyist movement or Trotskyist parties as a whole at any point. Obviously he said that the high mark was the 60s, but these figures are all from the 80s and 90s, and I think, I don't know, these are from the peak. I don't know, it doesn't say, so I guess they peaked after the 1960s and 70s. But it would be interesting to see, compare them at the same time. But it would still, obviously, I don't think it would actually change very much, but it is just as out of curiosity. In France, the Communist Party's all-time peak membership was 804,229 in 1946, and its post-1970 peak was 566,492 in 1978. The Lutte Ouvrière had a peak membership of 7,000, and Nouveau Parti Anticapitaliste had a peak of 9,000. And Parti Ouvrier had a peak of 10,000 in 2008. So the Communist Party's peak in France after 1970 would have been 566,000, and and the highest Trotskyist organized membership was the Parti Ouvrier Indépendant, POI, with 10,000. So 10,000 versus 566,000. In the USA, the Communist Party's all-time peak was 80,000 in 1944. And the Communist Party's and the U.S. Communist Party's post-1970 peak was 17,500 in 1985. The largest Trotskyist party in the United States was the Socialist Workers' Party, which peaked at 1,610 in 1977. So, the peak, the most relevant peak for the Communist Party USA was 17,500, and the peak of the Socialist Party organization was 1,610. So, 17 times more members. Alright, back to the main text, please. I'm done reading the chart. Membership data from other countries is sporadic, but reinforces the picture of Trotskyist weakness in relation to local communist parties. In Australia, early 1980s, the Socialist Labour League claimed 150 members and the Socialist Workers' Party 250 to 300, whilst Communist Party membership at the time was around 1,500 and its peak membership was around 22,000 in 1944. See Hobday, 1986. The Belgian Ligue Révolutionnaire des Travailleurs reported just under 1,000 members in 1985, compared to the Communist Party total of around 10,000 the same year, and a peak Communist Party membership of 100,000 in 1945. See Hobday, 1986, pages 46 to 47. In 1983, the Brazilian affiliate of the Liga Internacional de los Trabajadores, Quarto Internacional, LITCI, Convergencia Socialista, claimed 2,200 members compared to the Communist Party figure of 8,000 and a Communist Party post-war peak of 150,000. In Germany, the two largest Trotskyist organizations in the mid-1980s, the Helite Sozialistische Arbeiterbund and the USFI's Gruppe Internationale Marxisten, had a combined membership of around 400 compared to the German Communist Party's 50,000 members. In 2020, the membership of the Trotskyist movement was estimated at little over 1,100, with 450 in Marx 21 and 400 in Sozialistische Alternative Bundesamt für Verfassungsschutz 2021. The largest Trotskyist group in the Netherlands in the 1980s, the Socialistische Arbeiderparty, combined around 600 members in comparison to the Dutch Communist Party's 10,000 members. See Hobday, 1986. To this picture of membership decline, we should also add that of organizational demise. Since 1950, for example, almost 100 Trotskyist groups have ceased to exist in the Big Four countries alone: Argentina, Britain, France, and the USA. Elsewhere, and particularly in smaller countries, the dissolution or demise of a tiny Trotskyist group, often sustained by a handful of people, can spell the end of any Trotskyist presence in that country, a fate that has fallen 21 countries, including Luxembourg and Lebanon, as well as many others in Africa and Latin America. We can also contrast Trotskyist party memberships with those of the new, quote, radical left parties, end quote, RLPs, non-communist organizations to the left of social democracy that emerged in the 1980s across Western Europe. For more on radical left parties, see Chapter 4. Examples include Syriza, Greece, Podemos, Spain, and Die Linke, Germany. See in Table 3.2 presents their peak membership figures, from which it can be seen that they are dramatically higher than any figures achieved by Trotskyist organizations in those same countries, with the possible exception of France. The Front de Gauche in France, its membership peaked at 12,000 in the year 2013. Die Linke's membership peaked in 2009 with 78,046 members. Greece's Syriza peaked with a membership of 33,000 in 2013. The Socialistische Partij Netherlands had a peak membership of 50,740 in 2007, and Podemos in Spain had 250,000 members in 2014. It is true that after the bleak years of the 1950s and early 1960s, Trotskyist membership grew rapidly in many countries, and the period from the mid-1960s to the late 1980s was a, quote, golden age, end quote, for Trotskyist groups around the world, yet their claims of escalating revolutionary class struggles were savagely disconfirmed by the growth of neoliberal economic policies, world economic recessions, and major strike defeats, notably in Italy, Fiat, 1980, Britain, coal miners, 1985, and USA, the air traffic controllers, in 1981. Nonetheless, in Britain, the militant tendency, for example, grew from less than 100 in the mid-1960s to a peak of around 8,000 in 1988. Socialist Workers' Party membership in the USA peaked in 1978 at almost 2,000, whilst membership of the Argentinian MAS was around 10,000 for most of the 1980s. However, this period of growth was followed by an even more dramatic period of disintegration and decline. In 1985, the British Workers' Revolutionary Party with a claimed membership of almost 10,000, imploded into a series of warring groups who together attracted only a small fraction of the claimed 10,000 revolutionaries from 1985. The same year witnessed the disintegration of the Socialist League, formerly the International Marxist Group, Britain's affiliate of the United Secretariat of the Fourth International, USFI, and the emergence of three tiny groups from the League's civil war. Not long afterwards, the militant tendency expelled its founder, Ted Grant, along with his followers, and within a few years, an 8,000-strong organization was reduced to a pair of groups comprising less than a quarter of that total. There is a similar story elsewhere in Argentina. The MAS's 1988 electoral alliance with the Communist Party triggered the first of a series of splits as 200 disillusioned members resigned and created the Partido de los Trabajadores Socialistas, PTS. Over the next decade, 8 more groups were created from the crumbling edifice of the MAS. In the USA, the Socialist Workers' Party's repudiation of Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution and its wholehearted endorsement of the Cuban Communist Party led to a succession of mass resignations and the formation of 3 breakaway groups in the early mid-1980s, as noted earlier. The American movement has always been small, and at the time its 3 largest groups, the Socialist Workers' Party, the Spartacists, and the Workers' League, probably had a combined membership of no more than about 1,600, with other small groups perhaps taking the total of almost 2,000. In France, the 3 largest groups, LCR, Lutte Ouvrière, and the precursor of the POI, notably probably comprised about 15,000 members, with smaller groups adding perhaps another 1,000 or so in the mid-1980s. Following this chaotic and destructive period, the Trotskyist movement began to stabilize across the world and, in the opinions of many of their leaders, to prepare for a new phase of growth. The reasons for the optimism were clear enough. The collapse of the Soviet Union and the Eastern European, quote, socialist, end quote, states discredited their Stalinist governing parties and hastened the long-term decline of communist parties around the world, of which more later. It is true that some Trotskyist groups and commentators believe the events of 1989 weakened the whole revolutionary movement. Stalinist and Trotskyist alike, e.g. Wald, 2016, pages 312 to 315, but even the more pessimistic groups took comfort from the continuing economic problems and resurgent class struggle in particular countries, Argentina in the early 2000s, for example. To these events would be added the continued military incursions of the USA and its allies, notably in Iraq 2003, and the resultant protests around the world. A few years later, there was the global economic crisis of 2007 to 8, followed by the Arab Spring, the second eruption of a three-phase cycle of protests that began in the late 1990s, which continued in 2010 to 14, and then re-emerged in 2019 to 20 in both Europe and Latin America prior to and during the COVID pandemic. As many social democratic parties, including Blair's New Labour, had gradually adopted elements of neoliberal economic policy, whilst Communist Party decline continued apace, many Trotskyist leaders came to believe that their time had come and that mass protests would transform some of them into mass parties. Nothing of this kind actually occurred in any country at all, and the variety of attempts to seek a path to mass influence soon plunged the Trotskyist movement into renewed crises and splits. The previous chapter noted that French Trotskyism had managed to avoid the disintegration and decline that befell so many countries in the 1980s, and to have achieved the chimera of Trotskyist unity with the creation in 2009 of the 9,100-strong Nouveau Parti Anticapitaliste. Yet over the next 12 years, its membership dropped to around 1,500 following a succession of splits. Meanwhile, the quote Lambertist wing of French Trotskyism underwent a dramatic split in 2015, and its breakaway leader and former presidential candidate Daniel Gluckstein soon formed a new national party, Parti Ouvrier Indépendant Démocratique, POID, as well as a new international body. With Lutte Ouvriere's membership apparently stable and little growth elsewhere, total membership in 2021 may be less than 10,000. In Argentina, the country's largest and oldest Trotskyist group, the Partido Obrero, succumbed to a major split in 2019 after a dispute over electoral tactics with one of its founding members, Jorge Altamira. Says that Jorge Altamira was is an Argentine activist and politician leading the Workers' Party, Partido Obrero, in Argentina. That's just all it says, really, in the terms of the introduction. I'd have to read further into it, and I don't want to get off the track here. Developments in the USA have been even more dramatic, as noted in the previous chapter. Because of the 2019 decision by the country's largest Trotskyist group, the 900-member International Socialist Organization, to dissolve itself. Another large organization, the Spartacist League, suspended its publication in 2020, but as of April 2022, they have been replaced by nothing more than the occasional leaflet. A third large organization, Socialist Alternative, famous for having one vocal counselor in Seattle, was caught up in the slipstream for the Committee for a Workers' International faction fight and underwent a significant split as did two smaller organizations. Socialist Action, created in 1983 by a group of expellees from the Socialist Workers' Party, shed almost one-third of its 100 members in a dispute over the, quote, correct, end quote, position to be taken by revolutionaries on the war in Syria, whilst the International Bolshevik Tendency, IBT, a minuscule breakaway from the Spartacist League, also underwent a split over the question of whether or not Russia was an imperialist state. Notwithstanding the continuing activity of many small organizations such as Solidarity and the Party for Socialism and Liberation, a reasonable guess would be that U.S. Trotskyist membership 2021 is probably no more than about 1,500. In Britain, the most significant splits in recent years involved the Socialist Workers' Party and the Socialist Party, and these were covered in the previous chapter. The Socialist Party, under the leadership of Peter Taaffe, Taafe, accused the CWI's highly successful Irish section of abandoning class politics and trade unionism in favor of coalitions with social minorities. It says that Peter Taaffe my internet's not good out here, accused the CWI's highly successful Irish section of abandoning class politics and trade unionism in favor of coalitions with social minorities. For this, quote, crime of, quote, identity politics, end quote, Peter Taaffe forced a split in the ranks of the party and its international organization, the CWI. In Britain, around 150 to 200 members quit and started a new organization, Socialist Alternative, and a new international, whilst Socialist Party membership dropped to around 1,000. The upshot of this renewed round of fragmentation is that there are now, 2022, record numbers of groups in the leading centers of world Trotskyism, 23 in the USA, 21 in Britain, 16 in Argentina, and 15 in France, and it is a similar picture in other large countries. Brazil, 23, Spain, 14, Germany, 13, Mexico, 10, Australia, 9, and Canada, 8. The overwhelming majority of these groups are tiny, with memberships in double or treble figures drawn from national populations running to tens of millions, or more than 330 million in the case of the USA. Undeterred by such facts, Trotskyists continue to search for developments that will transform their tiny and vociferous groups into mass organizations. New section, Trotskyist Fourth Internationals. Both Lenin and Trotsky had long believed, because of the complex and numerous interconnections that comprise the global capitalist economy, a social revolution would obviously begin in one country, as in Russia, but it would have to spread across the globe, particularly through the advanced capitalist world, if a genuine socialist society was to emerge. This analysis formed part of the rationale for the creation of the Third Communist International in 1919, but from the early 1930s, Trotsky had become convinced of the necessity for a new international organization to promote the cause of world revolution and challenge what he saw as the treachery and betrayal of the Stalinist Comintern. The inaugural conference of the Fourth International was attended by delegates from 11 countries, yet despite the movement's fledgling status, 5 of those countries already contained competing Trotskyist groups: Belgium, Britain, France, Greece, and the USA, as did another 6 countries unable to send delegates to the French meeting. See Alexander, 1991. More than 80 years later, it is clear that such divisions were not a transient product of novelty and circumstance, but a harbinger of future developments. The 4 main centers of world Trotskyism are awash with organizations claiming to be the true heirs of 1938, and it is the same story in numerous large countries across the world, as noted above. Of the 69 countries with a Trotskyist presence, there are competing groups in 49 of them, with a concentration in regions where the Trotskyist movement is long established, namely Europe and the Americas, less so in Africa and Asia. For example, only 5 of 16 African countries have multiple Trotskyist groups, whereas this pattern is found in 20 out of 22 European countries. Croatia and Romania are the 2 exceptions. It is a similar picture at the international level, where the division between competing Fourth Internationals are both cause and effect of national divisions. 30 years after Trotsky created the Fourth International, there were already 5 rival organizations claiming exclusive continuity with the transitional program of 1938. The United Secretariat of the Fourth International, USFI, was then led by Ernest Mandel, and sometimes referred to as the Mainstream International. The International Committee of the Fourth International split off in 1953 to defend, quote, orthodox Trotskyism, end quote, against the, quote, revisionism, end quote, of the USFI, and was led by Jerry Healy, Britain, Pierre Lambert, France, and James Cannon, USA. And the Fourth International Posadist was created in 1962 and led by the Latin American Juan Posadas in protest at what he considered to be European and American domination of world Trotskyism and its underestimation of Latin America's significance. These three bodies coexisted with two minor organizations, Fomento Obrero Revolucionario, Workers' Revolutionary Ferment, led by Grandizo Muniz, and the International Revolutionary Marxist Tendency, created in 1965 by Michel Pablo. That's my first time hearing about this international of Muniz. That's very interesting. I'd like to know more about it. One second. Come on. Alright, well, I'll read that page about Grandizo Muniz when it's finished loading. The tendency to fragmentation, long evident at national level, became increasingly prevalent on a global scale as new organizations were created and existing Trotskyist internationals repeatedly split. In the 1970s and 1980s, a variety of national groups each created their own internationals in order to reflect their growing membership and influence, as well as their disdain for every other Trotskyist organization. The U.S. Spartacist League, an orthodox breakaway from the American Socialist Workers' Party, launched the International Communist League, Fourth Internationalist, ICL, Fourth International, in 1974, and the same year witnessed the founding conference of the militant tendency CWI, an organization generally committed to working inside social democratic parties. The French group Lutte Ouvrière, almost exclusively focused around factory agitation, formed the Union Communiste Internationaliste, UCI, in 1976, whilst the Argentinian MAS created the LITCI in 1982, following disagreements with the USFI and the ICFI. 1984 saw the appearance of the International Socialist Tendency, founded by the British Socialist Workers' Party, with its distinctive commitment to the, quote, state capitalist, end quote, analysis of the Soviet bloc, as well as the League of the Fifth International. The body was created by Workers' Power, a small split from the Socialist Worker. The latter body was created by Workers' Power, a small split from the British Socialist Workers' Party, on the basis of its radical view that because every Trotskyist current had degenerated in different ways, it was time to build a new Fifth International. It says the Revolutionary Workers' Ferment, often known by the Spanish name or initials Fomento Obrero Revolucionario, or FOR, was a small left communist international founded by Grandizo Muniz, which arose at a split from the Trotskyist Fourth International at its Second Congress in 1948. Though Muniz and his co-thinkers carried on polemics with other currents of Trotskyist origin for 3 decades, and it was only in the late 1970s that a formal organization was formed. The FOR only held one international conference at Paris in 1981. At that conference, a split emerged between, on the one hand, the, quote, interior, end quote, Spanish section based in Spain, supported by the Focus Group in the United States, and the Spanish, quote, exile, end quote, faction based in Paris, along with the French section. The interior Spanish and American groups were expelled from the FOR. Muniz and the FOR had developed a, quote, ultra-leftist, end quote, policy. They were opposed to the, quote, communist states, regarded them as state capitalists. They were opposed to the capitalist system and its form of government. They did not believe in parliamentarism, political parties, or trade unions. They did not believe in any kind of nationalism or national liberation struggles, and affirmed the, quote, inevitable necessity of the communist revolution on a world scale. Back to the text. Yeah, I knew that. Now that you said something about that group focus, I remember reading something about the group focus in one of the chapters about American Trotskyism and Alexander. But yeah, I think people from Focus kind of might have gone from like Muniz's project to something like trying to revive the IWW or something interesting like that. I'm not sure. Where am I? The League for the Fifth International. That's all. So we're going to look that up. That'll probably take a little while to load. The League for the Fifth International is an international grouping of revolutionary Trotskyist organizations around a common program and perspective. Well, that tells me nothing. The history. The LSI was founded as the Movement for a Revolutionary Communist International. Its first member groups were Workers' Power in Britain, the Irish Workers' Group, Pouvoir Ouvrier in France, and Gruppe Arbeitsmacht, GAM, in Germany. After a Congress in 1989, the organization adopted a common program, the Trotskyist Manifesto, and a democratic centralist constitution, which each national section agreed to be bound by the decisions of the international organization as a whole. As World Trotskyism entered a period of disintegration and decline from the mid-late 1980s, the dynamics of fragmentation underwent a qualitative change. Instead of thriving national parties launching their own internationals, it was the fragments of shattered national parties that began to create a host of diminutive new internationals. By 1985, there were already 12 Fourth Internationals in existence, but over the next 10 years, that number would more than double as new national breakaways extended their factional struggles throughout the existing internationals. In Britain, the Workers' Revolutionary Party implosion in 1985 quickly led to the creation of 4 new international bodies, 2 of which are still extant. The International Committee of the Fourth International, the ICFI, led by David North and consisting of tiny socialist equality parties in 8 countries, and even the smaller Workers' International, to rebuild the Fourth International. That same year, the Socialist League split from the USFI, encouraged the American Socialist Workers' Party to create its own new international, but in practice, the Socialist Workers' Party Pathfinder tendency, as it is known, is nothing more than an American body with a handful of foreign subsidiaries who produce no newspapers of their own but sell only the Socialist Workers' Party's militant newspaper and other U.S. literature. Its only other claim to significance is that it owns the Pathfinder Press, publisher of 14 volumes of Trotsky's writings, 1929 to 40, and many other works by Trotsky. The 1991 militant tendency split, led by Ted Grant and his allies, to create the International Marxist Tendency, a grouping that now has over 30 national affiliates, although many of them are even smaller than the British-based Socialist Appeal and its 400 or so members. It was events in Argentina that most dramatically reshaped the international Trotskyist landscape, as the MAS began to disintegrate in 1988 and its international parent, the LITCI, broke up into 4 separate organizations. Apart from the LIT itself, we now also have the Fracción Trotskyista Cuarta Internacional, FTCI, launched in 1943. Unidad Internacional de los Trabajadores Cuarta Internacional, UITCI, founded in 1997, and the Coordinadora por la Refundación de la Cuarta Internacional, created in 2004. There followed a period of relative organizational and membership stability during the first decades of the 21st century, but the failure of the Trotskyist movement to record any substantial advance in the wake of the 2008 to 2009 crash, the Arab Spring, and a decade of austerity and anti-austerity protest eventually led to a new round of soul-searching recriminations and international splits. In 2015, the French-based Lambertist Fourth International split into 2 following a schism within its dominant organization, the French POI, one of the largest Trotskyist groups in the world. Daniel Gluckstein and other leaders of the new party, the POID, quickly spread their dispute through other national parties, and the inevitable result was the creation of yet another Fourth International, the Comité d'Organisation pour la Reconstitution de la Fourth Internationale. I don't know how to say fourth in French. I don't know how to say any of these words in French, but I'm getting at my best. Corky, CORQI, launched in 2015. But if that was dramatic, they soon they were soon eclipsed by the events starting in 2019. Following the split in the CWI over class and identity politics, the rump CWI, led by Peter Tafe, has been reduced to just 13 national affiliates, with Taft's critics eventually found themselves divided between three new organizations: the Spanish-based Izquierda Revolucionario Internacional (IRI), comprising just 5 sections; the International Socialist Alternative, with a little over 20 national affiliates, including most of the members of the relatively large and Irish-American sections; the Internationalist Standpoint, formed in 2022, with 6 ISA affiliates, broke away after complaining about the governing authoritarianism of the new body. There's a chart here. This is a number of Trotskyist Fourth Internationals, 1938 to 2022. Okay, so there's less than 5 between 1938 and 1960. Then 1965, there's 5 internationals. By 1985, there's I guess about 12 internationals. That's by 1985. By 1995, there's over 25 internationals. By 2000, there's even more internationals. And by 2020, there's now over 30 different people, different internationals claiming heritage to 1938's the 1938 Constitution of the Fourth International. It's pretty fucking bananas. The overturn of these many ruptures is that by 2022 there are an astonishing 32 organizations around the world, each claiming to be the Fourth International or its nucleus, and in one case the Fifth International, because of the supposedly comprehensive and irrevocable apostasy of every single Fourth International. It is true that many of these bodies are tiny, sectarian, and irrelevant, but there are six internationals which have affiliates in at least 15 countries and are dominated by a party that counts its membership in the hundreds, if not thousands, e.g. the IST and the British Socialist Workers' Party. In France, the Fourth International, Lambertist, and the POI, and within the Argentinian-based LITCI, there is the Brazilian PSTU. A further 17... Sorry, there's a bunch of tables here. 17 have fewer affiliates and can be considered, quote, minor internationals, whilst 8 bodies are purely, quote, nominal, as they have no website, publications, or meetings, despite the occasional appearance of statements from that putative international. There's a very long chart here that I can't really say, but it's just like kind of like giving out the lay of the land of all the different tendencies and parties claiming a unique international. Trotskyist political influence and support. Having examined Trotskyist membership and organization, we now turn to try and gauge its political influence and support. This is clearly difficult to measure, although we know that many Trotskyist militants play key roles in trade unions, particularly in the 4 main centers of world Trotskyism: Argentina, Britain, France, and the USA, as well as in other countries too. See, for example, Stolarov 2014 on Portugal. In Argentina, the main Trotskyist groups, PO, PTS, IS, and MST, are all active in trade unions, including those in ceramics, construction, education, print, and transportation. See Alexander 1991. In Britain, Trotskyists have been active and influential in several major unions, including the National Education Union, Public and Commercial Services Union, Rail and Maritime Transport Union, Unison, and the University of College Union. In France, Trotskyists have played significant roles in three main union confederations: Confédération Française Démocratique du Travail, Confédération Générale du Travail (CGT), and Confédération Générale du Travail Force Ouvrière (CGTFO), as well as the Solidaire Unitaire Démocratique (SUD) breakaway unions. See Alexander 1991 and Connolly 2014. Trotskyists were famously active and influential in the U.S. industry strikes in the 1930s and subsequently built factions in the major industrial unions, including autos, coal mining, steel, ports, and transportation, led by militants such as Farrell Dobbs. The decline of industrial unions and the rise of public service unions shifted the center of gravity of Trotskyist workplace activity into sectors such as health and education. The militant Chicago Teachers Union, for example, was led by ISO member Jesse Sharkey. See Alexander 1991, LeBlanc 2016, Shepard 2012. Jesse Sharkey. Says that Jesse Sharkey, born in 1970, is an American former school teacher and labor leader in Chicago. From 2010 to 2014, he is the vice president of the Chicago Teachers Union. In October 2014, he became acting president of the Chicago Teachers Union after Karen Lewis stepped down as president due to illness. In May 2019, he and other members of the Caucus of Rank and File Educators, CORE, were re-elected to their leadership positions with approximately 2/3 of the vote. Back to the text. Yet the perennial challenge for Trotskyist organizations, as for the smaller communist parties, has always been how to translate workplace influence and support into enduring political influence through recruitment and election campaigns, an endeavor in which they have been conspicuously unsuccessful. See Thompson, 1992. Evidence on the political influence and support of Trotskyist parties comes from two main sources: electoral data and national case studies. Many Trotskyists will dispute the relevance of elections, uncritically following Lenin's dismissive view set out in The State and Revolution, a hugely overrated and largely exegetical work, quote, to decide once every few years which member of the ruling class is to repress and crush the people through parliament, end quote. Lenin. Consequently, Parliament can play no role in effecting radical socialist change, yet many choose to ignore Lenin's quite different remarks on this subject only a few years later, when he sharply repudiated the ultra-left dismissal of elections, noting that millions of people in Germany and other countries were supportive of parliamentary democracy, and that consequently, quote, participation in parliamentary elections and in the struggle on the parliamentary rostrum is obligatory on the party of the revolutionary proletariat, end quote. Lenin, 1920. In a chapter of left-wing communism devoted specifically to Britain, he asserted forcefully that because workers there lacked any experience of a reformist government, quote, the British communists should participate in parliamentary action, To act otherwise would mean hampering the cause of the revolution, since revolution is impossible without a change in the views of the majority of the working class, Lenin. The electoral participation of the Socialist Party in Britain through its alliance with the Rail, Maritime, and Transport Union is grounded in a similar appraisal of mass support for parliamentary institutions. See Cell 2021, and effectively disregards Lenin's ultra-left polemic of 1917. Even parties which rarely contest elections, such as the British Socialist Workers' Party, acknowledge the significance of vote shares. Quote, although election results cannot in themselves produce serious social change, election results can be a measure of people's desire for change, Harman. Trotskyist commentaries on national elections routinely treat vote share as a measure of party popularity. For example, Marine Le Pen's increased vote share in the second round of the 2022 French presidential election, 41% compared to 34% in 2017, was widely taken as evidence of the growing popularity of the far right. E.g., Fourth International 2022, IMT 2022, Lutte Ouvrière 2022, Socialist Worker 2022. A further reason for taking elections seriously is that Trotskyist electoral contests are invariably supported by an extensive array of media outlets, typically including a regularly updated site and a Facebook page, as well as newspapers and magazines. In both Argentina and Britain, the Trotskyist movement issues 6 newspapers, either weekly, fortnightly, or monthly, as well as a similar number of theoretical journals, both print and online. French Trotskyists produce 5 newspapers, including 4 weeklies, whilst American Trotskyists produce 7 newspapers. The first and most striking point to note is that in almost half the countries which have or once had a Trotskyist organization, 39 out of 81, there has not been even a single electoral challenge by any group to mainstream political parties. Trotskyist groups in some of these countries are fairly new and therefore tiny, as in the former socialist countries of the USSR and Eastern Europe, e.g. Croatia, Czech Republic, and Serbia. But the population of electoral abstainers also includes long-standing Trotskyist organizations in countries such as Canada, Cyprus, Ecuador, Finland, Indonesia, Israel, Japan, Nigeria, Norway, and South Korea. In some of these cases, Trotskyist groups have urged support for social democratic parties, e.g. Socialist Alternative called for a new Democratic Party vote in Canada in 2019, yet the most likely explanation for electoral abstention is the persistent and chronic weakness of Trotskyist organizations in these countries, measured by their minuscule levels of membership. Another driver of electoral abstention is the policy of entrism, the practice of infiltrating a larger left-wing organization in order to win support for revolutionary politics, recruit members to the usually secret Trotskyist faction, and secure electoral candidacies for members of the faction. Much less common now than in the mid-20th century, host organizations with Trotskyist interest groups can still be found across the world and include the Partido Socialismo e Liberdade, PSOL, and the Partido dos Trabalhadores, PT, both in Brazil, Die Linke, Germany, and the Partido Socialista Unido de Venezuela, PSUV. From time to time, the hosts tire of the endless factionalism of their parasitical interests and expel them, a fate that befell the CWI's Socialistische Alternatief at the hands of the Dutch Socialist Party in 2009, whilst Socialist Appeal and its members were expelled from the British Labour Party in 2021. In a further 39 countries, a total of 127 Trotskyist organizations have mounted over 470 independent electoral challenges, standing candidates under their own name, mostly starting in the 1970s and early 1980s, but in some countries beginning much earlier, e.g. Belgium 1929, France 1936, USA 1938, and Italy 1948. The overwhelming majority of these national contests for legislative assemblies have been unmitigated failures, with vote shares in over 86% of contests, over 400 below 2%. Indeed, Trotskyist vote shares in 104 countries in 11 countries have fallen below 0.1%, an abysmal and derisory result, e.g. Australia, Socialist Equality Party, 1998, 2007, 2010, 2016, and 2019, Austria, Sozialistische Linkspartei, 2017 and 2019, Germany, Sozialistische Gleichheitspartei, 1990, 1994, 1998, 2005, 2009, 2013, 2017, and 2021. Spain is Izquierda Anticapitalista Revolucionario and Partido Obrero Socialista Internacionalista, 2000, 2004, 2008, 2011, 2016, and 2019, and Sweden, Kommunistiska Förbundet and Rättsvisepartiet Socialisterna 1998, 2020, 2002, 2006, 2010, 2014. Matters are a little better in the four main centers of world Trotskyism. In England and Wales, Trotskyist organizations have contested every parliamentary election since February 1974, but on only 3 occasions has their median vote share risen above 1%, February 1974, 2001, and 2005. The American Socialist Workers' Party has put up candidates at 32 biennial congressional elections since 1938, but in almost all of them, 30 out of 32, its vote share has been less than 2%. Argentinian Trotskyism has proved a little more popular with an average vote share of 3.31% in the 21 legislative elections between 1973 and 2021. In elections to the French Assembly, Trotskyists have normally achieved a vote share of between 0.5% and 2% of the popular vote. Elsewhere, election results have been equally poor, even in those countries where Trotskyist electoral participation has become normal, defined as participation in at least each of the last 5 elections. Votes in presidential elections, mostly in Latin America as well as in France and the USA, have been equally abysmal, with 71% of Trotskyist candidates scoring less than 0.5% of the popular vote. The exceptions are few and far between. In Algeria, Workers' Party leader Louisa Hanoun scored over 4.5 in 2009. In Argentina, the Left Front has normally obtained between 2% and 3% of the popular vote in round 1, whilst in France, Trotskyist candidates such as Arlette Laguilère, Lutte Ouvrière, and Olivier Besancenot scored between 4% and 6% of the round 1 vote in the period 1995 to 2007, but have seen their vote shares decline rapidly since then. In the USA, the Socialist Workers' Party has fought most presidential elections since 1948, but even in its peak year of 1976, the party's almost 90,000 votes in 27 states represented just 2.15% of the votes cast in those states. In 2016, when the Socialist Workers' Party presidential vote of 8,586 in 4 states represented just 0.07% of the total votes cast in those states, its weekly newspaper, The Militant, declared 21st November that, quote, the 2016 election campaign was a victory for the Socialist Workers' Party, end quote. The vote for the Socialist Workers' Party candidate in the 2020 U.S. presidential election was even worse, just 4,215, 0.03% of votes cast in 5 states, and the party's newspaper simply chose not to report it. It is also important to notice the trends in electoral participation over the past 40 years or so, because these suggest a further weakening of an already weak movement. In 13 countries, Trotskyist electoral challenges have disappeared entirely. For example, there's been no Trotskyist participation in national elections in Bolivia since 1985, Canada 1984, Colombia 1998, Japan 1969, Mexico 1991, and Panama 1984. In a further 8 countries, the scale of Trotskyist electoral work has fallen dramatically in line with declining group membership. For example, at the height of its influence, the American Socialist Workers' Party contested 29 congressional districts in the 1974 election, but since the turn of the century, it has never managed to put up more than 3 candidates, and in some years it has failed to secure enough nominations for even a single candidate. 2002, 2014, 2016, and 2018. In Australia, the Socialist Alliance, a coalition of Trotskyist groups, held 28 candidates in the 2004 general election, but by 2019 it could manage no more than 3. Elsewhere, Trotskyist electoral activity has either been confined to a very limited number of districts in Austria, Chile, the UK, and Venezuela, for example, or has disappeared entirely as Trotskyists have sought to operate as factions inside larger parties in Denmark, Mali, Senegal, Tunisia, and Turkey. In 7 countries, Trotskyist candidates have secured a handful of elected representatives either for a very brief period, e.g. Bolivia, 1940 to 49, Namibia, 2014 to 19, the Netherlands, 1933 to 37, or for a longer period but many years ago, notably in Sri Lanka, where Lanka Sama Samaja Party, LSSP, parliamentary representation lasted from 1947 until 1964. Since the global expansion of the Trotskyist movement from the 1960s, it has secured representation in a handful of national legislatures, but never more than 5 countries at any one time, a figure achieved in 2000 and again in 2015. As of April 2022, there are just 3 countries where Trotskyist parties currently have any parliamentary representation at all, namely Argentina, 4 out of 257, India, 1 out of 543, and Ireland, 5 out of 160. Overall, it is clear that vote shares in national and presidential elections are almost invariably derisory and indicate very little support for Trotskyist candidates, even in countries where their organizations have been electoral participants for decades.
Results have proved to be no better in European or municipal elections, where the typically low turnouts combined with the mobilizing capacity of small Trotskyist groups compared to their mainstream rivals might be thought to confer a potential advantage to the former. Trotskyist candidates have fought European parliamentary elections in most countries since they began in 1979, but their vote shares have proved to be almost identical to those obtained in national elections. In Belgium, Germany, Greece, Italy, Luxembourg, Portugal, Spain, and the UK, Trotskyist candidates have almost invariably secured less than 1% of the popular vote. Only in Ireland and occasionally France have their vote shares risen above 1%. Municipal elections have been contested by British Trotskyists every year since 2011 through the vehicle of the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition, apart from 2020 when they were cancelled because of the COVID pandemic. But their several thousand candidates have managed to a median vote share in England and Wales of just 2.6% and elected a grand total of 6 councillors in 11 years. Some might question all this electoral data on the grounds that they ignore a range of countries, 11 in all, where electoral coalitions including Trotskyist parties have secured sporadic electoral success, and examples include the United Democratic Front, Namibia, Izquierda Unida, Argentina and Spain, Frente Amplio, Peru and Uruguay. On Spain, for instance, see Ramiro 2016. Yet many of these coalitions are deeply problematic, at least from a Trotskyist perspective. In 8 cases, they have involved alliances with the local communist parties, a policy that has traditionally been anathema to Trotskyists, and whose outcomes may tell us far more about the influence of the former rather than the latter, e.g. Argentina, 1989 election, Belgium, 1965, Italy, 1976 to 87, Portugal, 1999 to present, Spain, 2004 to 11, Sri Lanka, 1989 to present, Uruguay, 1971 to present, Venezuela, 2020. Indeed, the decision to forge an alliance with the Argentine Communist Party was one of the main triggers for the dramatic implosions in the late 1980s and early 1990s of the Trotskyist MAS, one of the world's largest ever Trotskyist organizations. 6 of these coalitions have involved such a broad range of political parties, both socialist and non-socialist, that they should properly be considered the exemplars of the, quote, popular front, end quote, a policy developed by the Comintern in the mid-1930s to oppose fascism through the construction of alliances between communist, socialist, and bourgeois parties. Denounced by Trotsky as a betrayal of revolutionary goals and contrasted with the United Front, communist-socialist alliances to promote revolutionary struggle, the term, quote, popular frontism, end quote, quickly permeated Trotskyist discourse both as a description of ideological heresy and as an emotive term of abuse. It is therefore unclear how one should interpret the electoral results of, say, the Uruguayan Frente Amplio, a coalition of 8 to 10 parties founded in 1971 by Social Democrats, Christian Democrats, the Communist Party of Uruguay, and the Trotskyist Partido Obrero Revolucionario, leading force in the Posadist Fourth International. Similarly, the leading Trotskyist party in Sri Lanka, the LSSP, has fought elections since 1994 as one component of the People's Alliance, later the United People's Alliance, a coalition of the Communist Party of Sri Lanka, a number of social democratic parties, and the Trotskyists. In these and other similar cases, the selection results secured by anti-coalition independent Trotskyists have been derisory, and the coalition tactic could therefore be defended as a mechanism for increasing Trotskyist influence. But the center of gravity of these coalitions is overwhelmingly social democratic. Whilst Trotskyist participation may provide the illusion of influence and power, there is simply no evidence that Trotskyist groups have acquired enhanced influence or membership as a consequence. Some critics might also point to the most recent success of the Argentinian Frente de Izquierda y de los Trabajadores, FIT, Workers' Left Front, with 4 deputies and a 5.13% vote share in the 2021 general election. The Front, after all, is an unusual electoral coalition consisting exclusively of 4 Trotskyist parties, and its success could be the harbinger of further advances to come. More likely is that this will prove to be a false dawn, like so many other Trotskyist, quote, breakthroughs, end quote, announced over the past 70 years. In Argentina, there were 4 Trotskyist deputies in 2001 and again in 2003, and a higher vote share, 6.42% in 2013. In France, Lutte Ouvrière scored a record 5.72% of the popular vote in round 1 of the 2002 French presidential election, but far from being a stepping stone to further advance, the result was the prelude to 20 years of electoral decline. The Scottish Socialist Party won 6 seats in the Scottish Parliament in 2003, up from just 1 seat at the previous election, but lost them all 4 years later and has never recovered. Finally, in the general election of 1985, the Mexican Partido Obrera Socialista, an affiliate of the LITCI, secured 2.59% of the vote and 12 deputies in the legislature, but by the time of the next election, the organization had ceased to exist. An earlier section of this chapter contrasted the peak membership figures of the Communist parties with their Trotskyist counterparts in 4 countries, and the same Communist Party Trotskyist comparison of electoral achievements reinforces the picture of Trotskyist electoral failure. As of April 2022, and despite many years of decline, the World Communist Movement still has a presence in 39 national legislatures, including France, Spain, Argentina, Brazil, India, Japan, Morocco, and South Africa, compared to just 3 for the Trotskyist movement. It is also important to read the evidence on party membership alongside the data on electoral performance because they concur in telling a similar story. Trotskyists have struggled everywhere to recruit substantial numbers of people and to build sizable organizations. Lack of membership and therefore finances hindered their ability to wage effective electoral campaigns reaching large numbers of people, but this is only part of the story. Even when large and better resourced Trotskyist groups have concentrated election campaigning in seats where they have a record of local activity, they too have struggled to push their vote shares about 1%. e.g. in Australia, Belgium, Britain, Germany, New Zealand, Portugal, and Spain. New section. Other evidence on political influence. Other assessments of Trotskyist influence using qualitative data from national case studies largely concur with the conclusions reached from electoral evidence. In Spain and Portugal, Trotskyist influence peaked in the mid-1970s with the end of the dictatorships, but began a long period of decline after the transition to democracy. See Serrano, 2018. In Greece, the electoral coalition Antarcia, front of the Greek anti-capitalist left, included two Trotskyist groups, but despite having a, quote, ideologically coherent, end quote, message, it was completely outflanked by the radical left group Syriza. When several Trotskyist factions abandoned Syriza in 2015 and formed a new revolutionary coalition, Popular Unity, its electoral results were wholly predictable. Less than 3% of the vote in September 2015 and just 0.28% 4 years later. In Italy, the, quote, trajectory of the Italian radical left, communist and Trotskyist, end quote, since 1989 was, quote, a spectacular failure, end quote. See Chiachetti, 2017. Whilst in Germany, the Trotskyist, Maoist, and communist left combined, quote, were utterly negligible from an electoral and institutional point of view, end quote. Chiachetti, 2017. In France, the Trotskyist movement has built some of the world's largest parties, and in 2002, Lutte Ouvrière obtained almost 6% of the first round vote in that year's presidential election. Left and far-left coalitions, Front de Gauche, 2016, and La France Insoumise, 2017, secured 6.9% and 11.03% of the popular vote and a small number of deputies in the legislature, 10 and 17 respectively. Yet according to two recent studies of the far left in France, the Trotskyist movement there remains, quote, small and marginalized, end quote. Escalona and Vieira, 2016. And consequently, of, quote, little relevance for the fate of its country, end quote. Chiachetti, 2017. The only bright spot in this otherwise dismal catalogue of failure is in Ireland, where a joint Socialist Workers' Party, Socialist Party coalition, People Before Profit / Solidarity, has built on its influence in key social movement campaigns to poll between 2.6% and 6.93% of the popular vote and secure 5 deputies in the 160-strong legislature. However, it remains to be seen whether the 2019 split in the CWI and the emergence of two rival groups in Ireland, Socialist Party and Militant Left, as well as the continued rise of Sinn Féin, will create problems for the coalition. In Belgium, the Trotskyist left remains weak and divided, and various attempts at organizational and electoral unity have quickly foundered. See Dupré, 2009. In Latin America, the overall political influence of the Trotskyist movement is equally minimal. According to Weber, a sympathetic analysis of the far left on that continent... Is it Jeffrey Weber? I don't know. I think there's a Jeffrey Weber who does stuff on Latin America, so that's why I'm saying that, but I don't know if this is the same guy. According to Weber, a sympathetic analysis of the far left on that continent, the declining popularity of the Workers' Party in Brazil should have created significant openings for the Trotskyist movement. But the highly fragmented movement was, quote, unable to achieve hegemony in the boulevards and the avenues, the plaza occupations, and the street assemblies, end quote. Weber. A similar observation was made by another experienced observer of the Brazilian left, Amir Sader, who remarked that, quote, the far left tendencies, failed to build a force to the left of the PT, end quote. Sader, 2011. In Chile, the revolutionary left is, quote, divided and trapped in sectarian debates with long histories and deep foundations, end quote. Weber, 2017. In Venezuela, a recent assessment by a local activist posted on the website of the mainstream Fourth International reported that, quote, The influence of the far left in corporations and unions is very weak, practically non-existent in the indigenous and peasant movement. ... Marea Socialista, PSL, Partido Socialismo y Libertad, and LUCHAS, Unitary Chavista Socialist League, among other far-left actors, are very weak and fragmented, end quote. Molina, 2021. One recent study briefly mentioned Marea Socialista, but said no more about it. Azzolini, 2015. Azzolini, I think it's Dario Azzolini. I'm not sure about his first name. But he wrote a book with, God, what the hell's the guy's name? The name's eluding me a bit. It's called To Master and to Own. Emmanuel Ness. I believe Azzolini wrote a book with Emmanuel Ness titled Ours to Master and to Own about instances of workers' control. Back to the text. Whilst the head of the IMT, Alan Woods, simply failed to mention the tendency's tiny Venezuelan section in his vigorous defense of the early years of the Chavez government, a likely sign of its irrelevance. In Bolivia, the governments of Evo Morales and his Movimiento al Socialismo created both opportunities and threats for the Trotskyist movement and its main party, the Partido Obrero Revolucionario, POR, an organization formed in 1935. Weber's 2011 study of the country from 2000 to 2010 makes no mention of the POR and its leaders. The veteran Guillermo Lora, until his death in 2009, and the teachers' union activist Vilma Plata, and neither does the study by Philip and Pinitza, 2011. Whilst Gonzalez argues the Bolivian revolutionary left was too doctrinaire in relation to struggles by social movements and indigenous peoples. In contrast, Sandor John, in 2009, is far more impressed with the continuing influence of the POR stemming from its role in the 1952 National Revolution. Yet despite several revolutionary opportunities over the past 70 years, the strength of nationalist sentiment meant that, quote, the Bolivian Trotskyists found themselves unable to bring them to fruition, end quote. In the case of Argentina, long-standing Fourth International leader Livio Meton, who's an Italian, proudly reported that, quote, Trotskyist organizations have exercised an undeniable influence at almost every turn, and in the social crisis of the end of 2001, organizations linked to Trotskyism were practically the only ones to dispute chronic Peronism, end quote. However, in the very next sentence, Meton declared that, quote, fragmentation, sometimes to an absurd extent, seemed to be Argentinian Trotskyism's permanent trait. This prevented Argentinian Trotskyism from fighting successfully to win the leadership of the workers and popular layers, end quote. Livio Meton. That fact perhaps explains why a recent study of class struggle in Argentina made no mention of Trotskyist organizations. Conclusions. Approximately 90 years after their first appearance, Trotskyist parties can now be found in almost 70 countries around the world. Yet the few available figures on organizational membership show they continue to be tiny organizations, often numbered in dozens or hundreds. The largest Trotskyist groups have only a few thousand members, and they are a rarity, concentrated in a small number of countries. Not only are these groups small, but they are deeply divided, split between 32 international bodies, each claiming unique continuity with the Fourth International founded by Leon Trotsky in 1938. Divisions at the international level are mirrored at national level so that in the main centers of world Trotskyism, in Western Europe, South and North America, larger countries will typically be home to at least a dozen Trotskyist groups and sometimes more. Not surprisingly, this tiny and vociferous movement has often proved too feeble to mount even a sporadic and limited electoral challenge to its mainstream party rivals and to build support for its policies. Where Trotskyist groups have contested elections, their results have almost invariably proved derisory. At the time of writing, for example, there are only 10 elected Trotskyist deputies anywhere in the world, concentrated in just 3 countries. These attributes of the Trotskyist movement are almost certainly interconnected. Most membership levels hinder effective electoral participation, whilst vote shares are those who do participate for those who do participate for while vote shares for those who do participate are typically derisory. Poor electoral performance in turn hinders recruitment either because the organization has no presence in most electoral districts or because its pitiful showing provides few incentives for people to join. The small membership levels and dismal electoral results offer over many decades together provide overwhelming evidence of the pervasive unpopularity of Trotskyist organizations and Trotskyist organizations' programs and policies. Notes. I don't know what these endnotes are connected to, but I am going to read them. There's not too many of them, so it shouldn't be too long. So you are more than welcome to just turn this off now. But okay, so endnote 1. Throughout this book, a Trotskyist group or organization, the terms are used interchangeably, is a body with a name, a website updated within the past 6 months, publications, regular or irregular, hard copy, online, or both, and which locates itself within the Trotskyist tradition. Bodies existing only as Facebook groups are therefore discounted. The countries which once had Trotskyist groups but no longer do so are as follows. In Africa, Benin, Botswana, Burundi, Chad, Ivory Coast, Morocco and Zambia. Asia. Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Myanmar, Papua New Guinea. In Europe, Iceland, Luxembourg and Norway. Latin America, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Honduras, Jamaica, Nicaragua, and Panama. See Alexander 1991 and Hobday 1986. And Leftist Parties of the World at the website broadleft.org. New footnote, or endnote. In chronological order, they are as follows. 1991, Autodeterminación y Libertad. 1991, Frente de los Trabajadores Socialistas and Tendencia Obrera Internacionalista, merged in 2011 to form the Partido Socialista de los Trabajadores Unificado. 1992, Movimiento Socialista de Trabajadores. 1993, Grupo Revolucionario de Trabajadores Socialistas, defunct. 1994, Partido Socialista Revolucionario became Partido de la Causa Obrera. 1996, Liga Socialista Revolucionario, defunct. 1998, Sindicato Socialista de Trabajadores, defunct. New endnote. The 12 organizations with their British affiliates, or, in the absence of such an affiliate, their main leader in brackets are as follows. Committee for a Workers' International, militant tendency. Quatrième International Posadiste, Revolutionary Workers' Party. Centre International de Reconstruction, Pierre Lambert. International Committee of the Fourth International, Workers' Revolutionary Party. International Communist League, Fourth Internationalist. Spartacist League, Britain. International Revolutionary Marxist Tendency, Michel Pablo. International Socialist Tendency, Socialist Workers' Party. Liga Internacional de los Trabajadores, Cuarta Internacional, Nahuel Moreno. Union Communiste Internationaliste, Workers' Fight. League for the Fifth International, Workers' Power. Revolutionary Workers' Ferment. It says Gabriel Muniz, but I think it's Grandizo Muniz. But maybe, I don't know. Maybe they know something I don't know. And the United Secretariat of the Fourth International, Socialist League. New endnote. Compare Marx and the Civil War in France, written in 1871, where Marx wrote that elections involved, quote, deciding 1 in every 3 or 6 years which member of the ruling class was to misrepresent the people, end quote. 6. The newspapers are produced by MST, PO, POR, PSTU, Convergencia Socialista, and Izquierda Socialista, Argentina, Socialist Workers' Party and the Alliance for Workers' Liberty, Socialist Appeal, Workers' Fight, and Workers' Power, Britain, NPA, POI, POID, Lutte Ouvrière and Revolution, Lutte Ouvrière and Revolution, France, Socialist Workers' Party, Party for Socialism and Liberation, Socialist Action, Socialist Alternative, Socialist Organizer, Socialist Revolution, and the Spark Group. New endnote. The full list of the, quote, electoral abstainers, end quote, is as follows: Africa, Botswana, Burkina Faso, Egypt, Ghana, Ivory Coast, Morocco, Nigeria, Togo, Tunisia, Zimbabwe, Asia, Bangladesh, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Iraq, Israel, Japan, Kazakhstan, Lebanon, Malaysia, Pakistan, Philippines, Russia, South Korea, Taiwan. In Europe, Croatia, Cyprus, Czech Republic, Finland, Norway, Poland, Romania, Serbia. Latin America, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, El Salvador, Haiti, Honduras, Jamaica, North America, Canada. Older electoral data has been taken from Nolan 2005 and Nolan et al. 2001, A, B, and B in 1999. New endnote. Vote share for smaller parties is often presented as a percentage of total votes cast in the election, as a measure that is meaningless because Trotskyist parties often contest only a small minority of seats. I have therefore calculated Trotskyist vote share as a percentage of the total votes cast only in those districts they have chosen to contest, and then computed the median vote share for each party in each election, excluding larger parties in which Trotskyists operate as a faction. The 39 countries are as follows: Africa, Algeria, Mauritius, Namibia, and South Africa. Asia, Australia, India, New Zealand, and Sri Lanka. Europe, Austria, Belgium, Denmark, England, and Wales. France, Germany, Greece, Iceland, Ireland, Italy, Netherlands, Portugal, Spain, Sweden, and Switzerland. Latin America, Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Mexico, Nicaragua, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, Uruguay, and Venezuela. North America, USA. I was unable to find data for the isolated cases of Trotskyist electoral participation in Canada, 1994, and Iran, 1980. New endnote. The countries in which Trotskyist groups have contested presidential elections are as follows: Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, France, Mexico, Nicaragua, Panama, Uruguay, and USA and Venezuela. New endnote. The other countries which have witnessed a cessation of Trotskyist electoral activity are Iran, 1980, owing to the subsequent repression of revolutionary groups; Netherlands, 1994, Nicaragua, 1990, Paraguay, 2013, Peru, 1985, and Sweden, 2014. In two of these countries, Trotskyist groups ceased independent electoral campaigning in order either to operate as a faction inside a larger party, the Netherlands until 2009, or to participate in a broad electoral front, Peru. New endnote. The other countries which have recorded a steep decline in the scale of a Trotskyist electoral challenge are Belgium, Germany, India, New Zealand, Sri Lanka, and Switzerland. The other cases are Mexico, 1979 to 88, Peru, 1980 to 85, Switzerland, 1999 to 2007. Endnote 13. Other examples are the Unidad Democrática y Popular, Unión, Bolivia, United Democratic Front, Namibia, Frente Amplio, Peru, and Alternativa Popular Revolucionaria, Venezuela. New endnote. The full list of countries with Communist Party members in their national legislatures as of April 2022 is as follows: in Africa, Angola, Republic of Congo, Guinea-Bissau, Mauritius, Morocco, Namibia, South Africa. In Asia, I don't know why Belarus is in this lineup, but anyway. Asia, Belarus, India, Iraq, Israel, Japan, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Nepal, Palestine, Russia, Sri Lanka, Syria. In Europe, Bulgaria, Cyprus, Denmark, Finland, France, Greece, Portugal, Serbia, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland. In Latin America, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, El Salvador, Guatemala, Paraguay, Peru, Uruguay, and Venezuela. Final endnote. The failings of Bolivian Trotskyism may also be related to the attributes of its leaders. The Fourth International leader, Livio Maitan, knew Lora and reported in his memoirs that he was, quote, an exasperatingly egocentric person of a rare intellectual arrogance, end quote. Maitan, 2019, page 190. So that's the end of the end notes. Thank you for listening.